Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
What first attracted 100-year-old Henry Kissinger to make a 14-hour flight, presumably with a medical team alongside him, all the way to Beijing? I think it must be war. And another rainbow warrior government in Europe goes down in the Spanish general elections this day. Although at 6 p.m. only 52% of the people had actually voted, which means that, as usual now in Western elections, it was the none and of the above party which was clearly the most popular. And in the British by-elections last Thursday, well, let me tell you, the situation isn't as clear as people thought it was. And Antony Blinken says Ukraine have taken back half of the territory that Russia occupied 500 and more days ago. Mathematics is clearly not his strong point. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a particularly bumpy night tonight, as Betty Davis would have said if she was still here. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
It's 8 p.m. in Spain, and we'll bring you any breaking results of the Spanish general election. But it looks almost certain that the Rainbow Warrior so-called socialist coalition has gone down in flames. That doesn't mean the people coming after them are going to be any better. But the fact that at 6 p.m., just half of the people of Spain had voted in a closely, bitterly contested general election seems to buttress my opinion that nobody much cared for any of the parties contesting for the fight. The so-called socialists and their so-called socialist coalition partners, and the so-called conservatives and their so-called far-right partners seem to have scrapped it out amongst half of the electorate, outbidding each other in a Dutch auction of more and more misery for the working class people, the vast majority of people in Spain. The only difference is that in Joseph Borrell's backyard of his garden, even fewer people wanted to back the policies of austerity and war represented by a misnamed Socialist Party of Spain. It is a miserable situation where the only choice available to the Spanish people was dumb and dumber, was worse and worser. And that offer is the offer on offer all across the European Union. But the important thing is the government has fallen, just like the Dutch government has fallen. The French government is broken. The German government almost entirely bereft of public support. The British government is so unpopular that they held on to the one seat of 3 that they contested for last Thursday, and only because of the rainbow warrior nature of the so-called Labour opposition. That was Boris Johnson's seat in Uxbridge and Ruislip. In Uxbridge and Ruislip, Labour put up a trans cultist and failed to capture a seat that should have been theirs for the taking. In the Yorkshire constituency that the Conservative government lost, Labour put up a 25-year-old, who looks 15 by the way, a 25-year-old candidate, fresh from Oxford University, a job as a parliamentary researcher for one of Tony Blair's finest, whose first act in taking his £87,000 a year job was to tell poor people with more than 2 children that they could look for no mercy from Keir Starmer's Labour Party. And in the other constituency of 3, the Liberal Democrats, more rainbow, more warrior than even the other 2 parties, took the seat. Why do I say the picture is not clear? Because although the public opinion polls seem to indicate that Keir Starmer should have stormed to victory in all 3 constituencies, in fact, they won only one of them. And in the seat that the Liberal Democrats won, Labour got just over 1,000 votes. These are not the performances in real-time elections to be expected of a party that is expecting to romp home and form a majority government just over a year from now. As I said, in all 3 cases, the none of the above party won, just like they did, apparently, in Spain this very day. I think the political class in the European Union and in North America is being demonstrated to be so completely out of touch with their electorate that if only a critical mass could develop behind a credible leadership and a credible alternative political program, it would romp to power. Something like that might be happening in the United States. Despite an ocean load of smears, despite every difficulty facing him, including his own voice, Robert Kennedy is burning up the tracks. He's currently the most popular candidate in the field for President of the United States with a 47% favorability rating. That's 2% better than Donald Trump, but it's more than 17% better than Joe Biden, his opponent for the Democratic Party nomination. We had the grotesque spectacle this week of the House, Congress in America holding a hearing on censorship with the Democratic Party, whose member he is, doing everything they possibly could to censor Robert Kennedy. Robert Kennedy Jr. turned up at a censorship hearing and was censored by the Democrat representatives on the committee. But when he finally did get to speak, when a Republican gave over his time to Kennedy to speak, his excoriating, incredible, short burst of denunciation, hurling invective at his own party was so effective, it raised him $5 million in a single day for his campaign to be the President of the United States of America. But here's the rub. So desperate was his own party to rubbish him, smear him, silence him, it seems to me inconceivable that that party will allow him, even if he won every primary election, to be their nominee. And so, Mr. Kennedy, you are now rapidly approaching the point of no return. You're either going to have to fall into line and support Joe Biden, that you have amply demonstrated is utterly incapable of being President of the United States. You're going to have to fall into line behind a Democratic Party that has covered you from head to foot in ordure, has tried to gag you at every opportunity, has tried to rig every primary election that you are about to contest, or you're going to have to now make the necessary preparations to be an independent third-party candidate in the upcoming presidential polls in 2024. I very much hope that you will choose the latter course. For if you choose the former course, then like Bernie Sanders, you will have proved to be all mouth and no trousers. You will have proved to be a masochist, a cuckold that is ready to be humiliated by his own party and will fade away in ignominy in public consciousness. And I don't think someone with the name Robert Kennedy should take that course. Somebody called Henry Kissinger, aged 100, took an airplane to Beijing this past week. 100 years old, on a 14-hour airplane on which he could easily have perished, flew to Beijing and was treated to a right royal welcome. None of this Antony Blinken being met by a junior civil servant and nobody even to carry his bags. None of this Lloyd Austin business, to whom the Minister of Defense of China will not even pick up the phone. Oh no, Henry Kissinger was given a reception befitting of an American president himself. Why? Well, the answer to both questions, why and why make the journey, is the same. The danger of a war between the United States and China over Taiwan has now reached fever pitch. I know it's hard to believe that, bogged down as they are in a losing war, a rapidly accelerating losing war in Ukraine, with the Russian army bursting through collapsing lines of Ukrainian forces, now unable to be reinforced, even though in this so-called counteroffensive, American sources say they have lost 26,000 dead, which means 75,000 wounded, 100,000 dead and wounded in the counteroffensive alone. There are simply not enough Ukrainians of even remotely definable fighting age to fill the gaps that are now being left. And the Russian army is advancing 4, 5, 6 kilometers per day, breaking through lines that are crumbling before them as their counter-offensive elsewhere washes up against the ring of steel fortifications that Russia has constructed in the central area of the front line in the Donbass. More and more Western commentators are saying that this Ukrainian counteroffensive is doomed, is failing. It went from slowing to failing to doomed in the last 7 days. And in the Daily Telegraph, which is not short of war fervor for the Ukrainian side, it speculated this week that the West and Ukraine are facing imminent disaster. Not what my words, but the Daily Telegraph's words. Imminent disaster. It would seem that the Russian advance can go on just as long, just as far, and just as comprehensively as the Russians decide that it will. We're very lucky then, or the Germans are, or maybe not, that it's quite likely that the Russian advance will stop before it reaches Berlin. But not content with one losing war after another in the last year and a half, the debacle in Afghanistan, followed by the imminent disaster in Ukraine, the danger of an American-China war has rapidly ramped up. And that presumably, and I say this advisedly, is the reason Kissinger flew to China. We'll hear from an expert in China in the course of this show on what this trip was all about and what its likelihood of a successful outcome might have been. Lastly, if 2 wars was not enough, the United States seems embarked upon a war with Iran. I know, a war on 3 fronts. What could possibly go wrong? Fighting Russia, China, and Iran all at the same time, with an ailing economy, with a president who doesn't know where he is. What could possibly go wrong? But the US is doubling down in Syria, sending thousands of new soldiers to illegally occupy parts of Syria which border Iraq, which borders Iran. Many people believe, and I am among them, that they are seeking a provocation in Syria as a casus belli to launch military aggression against Iran. And if they do, it may be their biggest mistake yet, because Iran is more than capable of hitting them back, and of hitting their proxy back, with all guns blazing. Iran's own weapons and the weapons of Iran's allies in the region will rain down fire and destruction in the Persian Gulf, but maybe as far away as the Levant itself. We'll be talking about all these subjects, plus a subject that you might not anticipate that we will: the travails of Alec Baldwin and the shooting dead of an actress on set in Hollywood in the United States of America. It's a more interesting and fundamentally important story than you might have thought, because it goes to the heart of the US justice system itself. Fasten your seatbelts. This is the mother of all talk shows. Let me say that you can listen to the audio-only version of Moats on our Moats podcast, and the numbers on that are going through the roof. Just search Moats with George Galloway on Apple, Spotify, Google, or whichever platform you listen to your podcasts on. In recent weeks, it's been the #1 political podcast in Benin, Jordan, the Gambia, Qatar, Jamaica, Ghana, Iceland, Malaysia, Singapore, Sweden, and the Philippines. #1 political podcast in all those countries. Truly, truly phenomenal. Do you know that BBC News has lost 40% of its audience in the last 2 years? It's official. And of course, that is the sensible thing to do. But to get people to tune in and change course and listen to a radically different point of view is even more difficult. But it's happening. And the numbers that we are racking up are now in their millions.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, it was another disastrous week for Joe Biden. I've lost track of the number of embarrassing videos we have amassed about Joe's latest problems. But his biggest problem was in the Congress itself. Not only were they looking into the issue of censorship, they were looking into allegations, credible allegations, from FBI whistleblowers, which seemed to substantiate the claim that the Biden crime family took tens of millions of illegal, illicit, corrupt dollars from Ukrainian companies, but from other foreign entities also. And so we're posing the question in the poll this week, will Ukraine destroy Biden? I mean, in the round, the corruption allegations, the expenditure of unaudited, unchecked, almost uncountable billions of American taxpayers' dollars to a regime that may not exist by Christmas. Will Ukraine destroy Biden? Nearly 20,000 people have voted in that poll already. Will Ukraine destroy Biden? Yes or no? You can answer on Telegram, t.me/George Galloway. Follow me on Telegram, on Twitter, on the YouTube community poll, and on the YouTube stream. And the phone numbers, if you want to comment on anything I've said or didn't say, ought to have said, or my guests for that matter, here are the numbers. It's entirely free. In the UK and Ireland, the number is 08081965522. That's 08081965522. And in the US and Canada, again, toll free, it's +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. And in the rest of the world, it's 44203 966 2625. That's 44203 966 2625. Angelo Giuliano is my favorite commentator these days, coming out of China. He's a European who's lived in China for decades and knows what's going on there, and moreover, knows the lies that are being told about China in Europe and indeed across the so-called Western world. Angelo, it's always a privilege to have you on the mother of all talk shows, especially in an auspicious week like the one we've just had. What first attracted Henry Kissinger at the age of 100 to fly all the way to China? What's your take on it?
I think even though Henry Kissinger is a war criminal and I'm not very much of a fan of him, but it seems like he might be a voice of reason and he might actually negotiate something with China. What the US has been doing is putting pressure somehow, maybe for negotiation on a bailout, because what people tend to forget is that one of the main problems that the US has, and this is related to the fact that they had the privilege of printing whatever amount of currency they had, because it's the US dollar is a global currency. But what the problem the US has is a debt of over $31 trillion. And I think there's a possibility that maybe the US might be actually negotiating some kind of bailout, because that could be a solution out of war. Because if the US were to lose the US dollar hegemony, it would be just dramatic. But not only for the US. Keep in mind that nobody has any interest in having the US collapse. The whole world would suffer out of this. And also China. Its economy is closely related to the US, although China has been actually, they risk what they call decoupling, and they're risking for a while. You know, there's a diversification towards South America, with the global South, with Africa. But China is very pragmatic. They don't want war, and actually they still want to trade with the US. it's not of China's interest to have the US collapse. He wants a multipolar world. There's a new world order that's going to be built up, and I think we might be in a situation where negotiations are being done. I like to compare. There was a meeting of BRICS a few months ago, and I like to compare to the Yalta meeting. It was when the Yalta meeting was when the war was not over yet, but they were actually starting to prepare the world of tomorrow. What would be the new world order? And BRICS is part of it. So somehow now, maybe what Kissinger might be doing is trying to set up some conditions how we could do this transition. But again, this is a speculation. We don't know what happened at that meeting. But the main problem the US has right now is this huge debt that it cannot repay. And if the US loses its US dollar hegemony, that could be dramatic. It would be just disastrous because it would be like a hyperinflation, huge unemployment. So that is by speculation, but it's hard to say. That's maybe my wish too, because we don't want to have a war, which would be ultimately a mutual destruction, because nobody wins on the Third World War when you have a nuclear superpower like China, Russia, and the US facing each other.
Well, many people will find it incredible that you and I are credibly discussing the possibility that China will bail out the United States of America. The American Bretton Woods era would very obviously be dead and buried were that to happen. And yet, given the China's holdings of US bonds, China could destroy the US bond market. It's already been decoupling and de-risking itself from the US bond market, from its holdings in American dollars, but it could simply sink the whole place by dumping its remaining bonds on the market and totally destroy the ability of the US to repay its debts. So it is a credible speculation that you are making. I merely press you on this point. Janet Yellen was there just a couple of weeks ago, kowtowing, bent over double with Chinese officials, apparently blinking that Chinese officials like people kowtowing to them, which of course meant she got her countries mixed up. Blinken was there just a few weeks before that. Why would you need to send a 100-year-old man to negotiate with China? That's very dramatic, isn't it?
No, absolutely. It's a sign that the US is desperate. I think they put in pressure. They're trying to do regime change in Russia. They've been trying for a long time. They've been trying in China to destabilize China through Tibet, through Xinjiang, through the whole region. And this is maybe it's part of the negotiation of, on this bailout, on this construction of the new world order. Maybe. But again, I think there are probably two camps in the US. You have the radicals that would go all the way just to direct confrontation. And some people are just realizing, well, you just imagine, NATO cannot beat Russia, which has not even 10% of NATO expenditure in defense. So just imagine, as you said just before, how many wars the US has lost? The last war the US lost, the won was, I think, was Grenada. They lost all their wars, and it's just madness. It's like Einstein said. Madness is keeping doing the same result, the same things, and expecting different results. That is what is happening. So it is very hard to say. And again, I think that what is happening in the US is their own system, their political system is extremely unstable. People are, they've been fooled for many times. They're in a vicious circle of electing and regretting, and people are just realizing that they've been fooled. You can fool people so many times, but at the end of the day, they don't support their own system. They don't support the media, which are telling that their own people that they have the best system in the world, that they should teach the world and so on. But facts are there. Just to give you a few figures, there's probably 30% of people in the US that actually trust their own government and their political system. And it's such an embarrassment because if you compare with China, you have 90 to 95% of people that trust and support the political system. You have 80% of people in Russia that actually support Putin. And when I give you those figures, George, those figures come from Western sources, very biased, but they cannot lie. And you don't need much. You just go into the streets of Moscow, you just go into the streets of Shanghai. You talk to those people. I've seen it. I was in the first time in China. I arrived in China 30 years ago, and I saw the reality. It was very backward. It was poor. People were hungry, and people are still hungry. They are a hard-working force. The mentality is, it's a very tough mentality, and they come up, they had tough times. If you look at Chinese history, now what they want is prosperity. They want tangible results. It's a different culture. Not only the culture is different, but when you look at the profile of their leaders, they are engineers. They come from science, math, technology, engineers. So those people, they create tangible things. Now look at the leaderships we have in the West. They're youngsters. They are in their 40s, like Macron, they're very telegenics, Trudeau, and so on. Background, well, Macron is an ex-banker. He's going to do a revolving door. He's a Rothschild banker. He came from there. He was pre-selected by the elites. He goes into politics. Then he goes back to being a banker. That's what is going to happen. He's going to be multi-millionaire, and he's going to make his bank, the Rothschild bank or whatever bank he's going to work with, even richer. The profile of those people, Western leaders, are lawyers, bankers, and they do not produce anything. And not only they don't produce anything, they're out of touch of when it comes to the reality of what people want. They are not following their voters' wishes. They are following the orders of whoever funded their campaigns. So those are the problems. We really need to get our house in order. And there's one point I want to say, but because we are being criticized, people like me that are have been in the West for a long time, as being traitors, as they say, well, I love China more than my country and so on. It is not. And I would, my position is very similar to Scott Ritter's position when it comes to loving my country. Why do I denounce my country? Because I do love my country. That is a responsibility. And I think I love more my country than people that are blindly following the mistakes that their country are doing. And do I love China more than my country? No. But I do envy China. I envy their system because I see what they've done for their people. And when I see tangible result, prosperity, because ultimately it's about, it's not about promises. It's not about selling dreams. I have a dream and so on. Okay, you are going to touch emotions. But emotions, does it feed you? Does it bring you food on the table? It doesn't. Chinese want tangible results, and that's what the West wants. But what they do in the West, they've done everything to suppress the class consciousness, to suppress the reality by doing lots of diversions. They are dividing people over races. They are dividing people over genders. And that's the usual divide and conquer. What in reality, there's two classes the upper class of the 1% and the rest. And they are so afraid that the rest realizes, they get this class consciousness, and they realize that, oh, you know what? We need to unite together, and we need to bring back democracy. What is the meaning of democracy? Because the West keeps on hammering the global South. Oh, democracy, democracy. Well, go back to the meaning. Demos kratos, power to the people. The rules of the games need to be written by the people. Give back power to the people. And ultimately, you know what? It's not about labels. You know, we need to be extremely careful. And I think you've mentioned this quite a few times. Stop putting labels. The ism, socialist, capitalist, and so on. You put people into boxes. In reality, there's two classes. The upper class of the 1% and the rest. And we are all the same. And we need to regain this power. And guess what? You go to China, that's a power by the people, for the people, of the people. You know, and again, you know, it's not the fact that in the West you have you cast a ballot doesn't make it a democracy, because the candidates you are going to elect were pre-selected by the elites, and the rules of the game were written by the elites. This is why what you have when you look at France, that movement, the Yellow Vest, was a very smart and mature movement. And they were actually working about the foundation of democracy was sovereignty, regaining sovereignty, direct democracy, so referendum rights, and actually educating people about what is a real democracy. Because see, you know, people educated are very dangerous. You give education, that's a weapon, because people start realizing, and they don't want that. They are going to do diversion, you know, to distract you. Netflix, drugs, alcohol, you are enslaved by your job, you are in a survival mode, and you do not have time because you are in survival mode. When do you have like 10 minutes just to study, you know, and to look at your own problem? And now what the West is doing, you're going all the way 10,000 of miles to China, and you're pointing out China bad, and you're even investing $500 million to demonize China. This is a loser's game.
And the propaganda fund, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry, it was a long one. Yes, it's a huge topic. We need to go back.
Not at all. Look, I was just going to make this point. The Spanish government that appears to have fallen today will be remembered for two things. First of all, Joseph Borrell's concept of the European Union being a garden and the rest of the world being a jungle. And the second thing, their only parliamentary achievement will turn out to have been an overhaul of the sexual offences legislation in Spain. An overhaul which led to the premature release of hundreds of rapists and pedophiles and perverts of all kinds, and an overhaul of the law on bestiality. The Spanish socialist government changed the law so that having sex with an animal will no longer be a criminal offense as long as the animal was not harmed as a result of the experience. That's what they call an achievement, Angelo, as compared to the achievements, material achievements of the government in China. Last word to you, my friend.
Well, I think when it comes to European politics, it's always very important to understand what is this project of Europe. The European project was actually a CIA initiative. You know, Jean Monnet is considered the father of Europe, was on a CIA payroll. You can actually follow, you know, there are a few politicians in France like François Asselineau and Marie-France Garot. They actually they have exposed this project. What was Europe about? So when it comes to Europe, you know, I have only one single conditions. You know, if you want to choose someone, a politician, you need a politician that is actually advocating for exiting Europe, because the first preconditions for democracy is sovereignty. The countries in Europe need to regain their sovereignty, because all the decisions are in Brussels to people that you are not electing and that are actually following the orders of the thousands of lobbyists in Brussels. Whoever you choose, it's all there. They don't have rooms. If you are president in let's say Macron, you don't have any rooms for deciding. All the decisions are made there, and it's just what you do. It's just locally some fine tuning. And the project of Europe is a completely destruction of nation state. And they are going to do it through immigration and so on. This, and also I'm not even talking about this social engineering of deconstruction of human being. It's a whole project which is extremely evil. And you mentioned pedophilia. Well, we are going to legalize into the direction of legalizing pedophilia. It is extremely evil, and they call themselves progressive. It's not. We need to fight this because it's extremely evil. And again, it's past the limit. I mean, animals, kids. No way. We need to go out in the streets. We need to fight this.
Angelo Giuliano, as always, brilliant to hear from you and get your take on contemporary events. Thank you indeed for joining us. Will Ukraine destroy Biden? Yes or no? Get voting on the poll on Telegram, on Twitter, on the YouTube community stream, or on the YouTube stream itself. I should say, Dennis Lim says, I think Angelo is wrong in his assessment. Kissinger is in China to find an off-ramp for the US to get out of the war in Ukraine. Very interesting observation, Dennis. Do call us in order to expand upon it. But let me take a quick break first. On the line is a Rose in Texas. I was at the beginning of a song. On Californication, which is a song. Rose, welcome to the show.
Fan of the show, transgender fan of the show, and I wanted to briefly address your monologue from last week on Californication, because I almost entirely agree with what you said. Trans women athletes taking medals and records, directing children at nightclubs, and even going to elementary schools themselves, not to mention hormone blockers for children as well. The attack on freedom of speech, not only against conservatives, but anyone who doesn't fall in line with the agenda, rainbow flags on NATO military aircraft, which is certainly doing more to cultivate anti-queer sentiment around the world than there already is. All of that makes me sick. So because I don't believe in incest, bestiality, necrophilia, and pedophilia, I'm basically culturally right-wing by today's standards, even though less than 5 years ago, I'd still be left-wing. So in regards to you and everyone else watching who thinks of me and people like me as the villains right now, you should know that I support the most traditional Muslim, Jewish, Abrahamic believers to be as homophobic and transphobic as they want, because guess what? That's freedom of religion, which is a value we claim to have in the West. Now, my religion, I suppose, is I believe I'm a woman, but guess what? Not everyone has to convert to my religion. Otherwise, we basically have a theocracy, only this theocracy is for the ever-evolving LGBTQIA supercalifragilisticexpialidocious club. So that's all I wanted to get out of my system. Thank you.
Well, Rose, if I could put your call in a glass bottle and ship it around the world, I promise you that I would do so. Crystal clear, beautifully expressed, and I wish you every happiness in life. It is exactly what people who are transgender should be saying. And if they were, they would disappoint the liberal zealots who want to use them as a battering ram against the traditional family values of the rest of us. Beautifully expressed, Rose. I'll never forget it.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
So more than 20,000 people have now voted. Will Ukraine destroy Biden? Yes or no? Bob Cosmic says, Henry, the Kissinger of death. Well said. And an email, George Anthony Blinken has just stated that Ukraine has overtaken 50%, or has retaken rather 50% of seized territory. Surely this is propaganda. Actually, it is simply bonkers. Thanks, Ben. Let's go to the lines. Sadie is in New Jersey on Angelo's interview. Let's hear what Sadie thinks. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Mr. Galloway. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for taking my call.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Thank you, sir. So, first off, I really appreciate you having Mr. Giuliano on your show, because it was a very good insight as to why maybe Kissinger has gone to China. I never thought that it would be something to do with the bailout. And I appreciate you providing a platform like this to give us different insights and different ways of thinking. So my salute to you, and I appreciate all you do.
Okay. Thank you, my dear. I think it is extraordinary, don't you, that we
I do. I never thought it would be
talking about China bailing out the United States. That would solidify the hitherto kind of nascent complete change in the world order, wouldn't it? That would make China number one. It would make China the number one hombre in town, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. I very much agree with you. And the fact that we don't really hear these type of insights, right? So to get this viewpoint and to think about it and then process it, I think it's really good for all of us. And so I'm very thankful that you give us this platform.
It's called democracy. It's called democracy. It's called being the land of the free, and so on. All the things that the Western countries pay lip service to whilst burying, if not criminalizing. Thank you very much for that, Sadie. Very kind call. Email from Tony. By the way, you can email us at any time, and if I can, I'll read them out. Hi, George. President Putin today confirmed that Ukraine lost 15 Leopard 2 tanks and 20 Bradley fighting vehicles in just 24 hours. Oh, my heart breaks. 26,000 Ukrainian troops were killed in this counter-offensive. That's the real tragedy. Online too, Michael is in Dublin, wants to talk about RFK. Go ahead, Mike.
Good evening, George. Thank you to you and to your staff for having me on the show. I want to express my outrage at the way that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was treated at the Congress. This Debbie Waberman Schultz, she was the chair of the Democratic Party, and she had to resign because she gave the questions in advance to Hillary Clinton during the debate when she was up against Bernie Sanders. That was a scandal in itself. But then she comes on to the Congress and she accuses the hearing the other day, and she accused Robert F. Kennedy Jr. of being an anti-Semite. The only reservations yourself and myself have about Robert F. Kennedy, we are 100% in support of him. But the one thing that we worry about is that he is so supportive of Israel and the Jews. So, as opposed to showing any compassion for the Palestinians. Well, he was treated disgracefully, and when he was in front of Congress the other day, they accused him of practically everything under the sun. And I watched this morning Fox News, and they have a program called the Media Buzz, which is probably the most balanced program on Fox News, and it gives both sides an equal time to the Republicans and the Democrats and everything else, and it gives a real insight into the media. It's the only fair show on media. But today, they absolutely spend a quarter of an hour smearing Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Smearing him on a program that is normally balanced.
Although Michael, Michael, let me make this point. It isn't working. Kennedy now has a higher favorability rating amongst the US public than all the other candidates. This is quite extraordinary. He's more popular than Donald Trump. And he's nearly twice as popular as Joe Biden. And on that day, he was treated so disgracefully, and I agree entirely with you. He raised $5 million for his campaign. So it isn't working, is it?
It's not working because here's a man who tells the truth. When what he was doing was telling the truth. And as he said himself, he wants to save the Democratic Party. He wants to save the party of his father and his uncle John F. Kennedy. He wants to save that party. He wants to bring it back to where it was, a fair and reasonable party, speaking on behalf of the working class in America. All they speak on behalf now is, and never mind who they speak on behalf of, it's the fact that they can't tell the truth about anything.
About anything. Well, I personally believe that neither the Democratic Party, nor the Labour Party in Ireland, nor the Labour Party in Britain can be saved or deserve to be saved. I believe all three of them have to be in the dustbin of history. That's why I very much hope that Kennedy, at the appropriate point, will break from the coffin that is the Democratic Party of the USA and go independent as a third-party challenger. Michael, thank you for the call from Dublin. Paul sends an email. It's not just the countries you have listed who have suffered at America's hands. African, Asian, and South American countries have grown tired of their people working so hard only to line the pockets of American billionaires. It has taken a while for the realization to sink in, but they are now getting it together to insist on a fairer distribution of the profits. And good luck to them, says Paul Brown in Sheffield. Thank you for that, Paul. Let's go to a legend in New York. It's the one and only Robos. What would you like to say to us this evening, Sage?
Greetings and salutations, Mr. Galloway.
And you.
Blessings to you, your family, and of course the listeners. I do want to highlight Teresa Kelly, who I had the pleasure of meeting about 2 weeks ago or so now. She came to New York, and we had two legends, two Moats legends, and we had a nice time speaking and conversing.
Lovely.
I asked her to send you the picture.
God bless her.
Yes, definitely, definitely. A very great woman indeed. The nature of my call today, I found out a few days ago, that President Putin had spoke out resolutely against the buildup in Lvov, or what the Polish would call Lvov, of the entry into the Ukraine conflict. And I remember some months ago, I had emailed yourself, Garland Nixon, and the guys from the Duran. And the purpose of me emailing you in particular was because I actually developed the analysis from you all, I should say. And my comment in the form of a question back then, and it was simply that Russia cannot tolerate Poland coming into the conflict or seizing Lvov if they were an independent country, if they were not part of NATO, this would have been easier to negotiate. You know, it's quite possible because Putin had made statements in the past along the lines of saying, you know what, you want to have your ancient territory, have at it. But because they're part of NATO, it will be a cat's paw. It will basically be a new Ukraine front, right? If Russia was to push them all the way back to the Galicia area, then they'll just build up there and become a new Ukraine front and start attacking from there. So that's an intolerable situation. And like 3 days ago or so, Putin has confirmed this, that this is not going to happen without severe consequences to Poland. So, I saw different analyses at the time, a couple months ago, and some pushback, but it seems that it has come full circle now, and I was curious about your thoughts on this.
Well, I agree with you entirely, as I do most of the time. Moreover, if this Polish build-up takes one step into Belarusian territory, it will be all-out war between Russia, Belarus, and Poland. Now, then NATO can decide if it interprets Article 5 of the NATO treaty to mean that it must sacrifice itself and the whole world's population to come to the assistance of a Poland which has itself invaded another country. My guess is, as I frequently opine, that the other NATO countries will not sacrifice themselves for Poland, let alone for a conflict caused by Poland illegally entering another sovereign territory, that of Belarus. Moreover, not just a sovereign territory, but a territory in a union with Russia, because that's what we're talking about here. Belarus and Russia are a union, like the union of Scotland and England. The idea that Russia would tolerate Polish revanchism invading Belarusia under the guise of seeking to occupy, to protect the western Ukrainian territories, including Lvov, is for the birds. And I hope everyone in Brussels at NATO understands that. There will be a war between Russia and Poland were that build up to take that form. But even if that did not happen, as you rightly say, Poland taking back its ancient territories from Western Ukraine, well, what about Russia taking back its ancient territories from Poland, including Warsaw? You see where I'm going here? If we get to that stage, well, we might as well throw the Treaty of Westphalia up in the air. We might as well forget all of the borders in Europe, in Eastern Europe. We might as well say Russia will take back its ancient territories in Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and a huge part of Poland, and so on. So Poland is playing a very dangerous game. And it's up to Poland's friends, as well as the Polish people themselves, to tell their government that they are playing with fire. Now, coming up, we will be talking about the Alec Baldwin case and the tragic shooting of Halyna Hutchins, the director of photography on the Western film Rust. It's a more significant story, even than you think. Stay tuned. I'll be right back for the second half of the mother of all talk shows. You don't get to call me far right. You don't get to call me that on my own show. A lifelong socialist. the leader of a socialist party, the Workers' Party of Britain, with an Indonesian wife, with 5 mixed-race children, with a record of fighting racism all of my life, representing more people of colour in the British Parliament than anyone in history by a country mile. You don't get to call me far right. These kind of idiotic insults tossed around by infantile leftists who think that anyone to the right of them is a fascist, is a racist. They are the cause of the crashing and burning of what used to be called the left. They are the cause of it. They have discredited leftism with their foolish, idiotic isms and ists and smears that emanate from them like a bad smell.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Eric Hunley is a man who knows the story of Alec Baldwin and Halyna Hutchins very closely indeed, more closely than he would have liked to. He is a broadcaster of note. He is a co-host, a fellow television show host like me, and he's been caught up in the terrible story of how Alec Baldwin came inadvertently to fire live ammunition on a film set. The rest is controversial. Let me ask Eric to tell us himself. He's the co-host of America's Untold Stories and the host of Unstructured. Well, we're structured, but we like untold stories, Eric. So thanks for joining us. Tell us where you fit into this story, as well as describing to those who may not know, this is a global audience, what actually happened that fateful day.
Okay, good. Thank you for having me. Ironically, the story is tied in with my channel, America's Untold Stories with Mark Robert. The shooting occurred October 21st, 2021, and that was the day before I recreated our channel. So our channel kind of coincided with the incident actually happening. Mark is a scriptwriter and has worked with the likes of Oliver Stone, and being around Hollywood, he said, hey, you know what, let's do one episode covering this whole Alec Baldwin shooting. It was all over the news, so we decided to cover it. It was going to be a one-off story. The story grew legs, however, and it is a confusing, utter mess. If I'm going to take you through the day very quickly, essentially, the morning of the shooting, the film crew walked off the set. Everyone except for Halyna Hutchins, the director of photography, and of course her lighting people. Because these people were off the set and there were COVID protocols, some things got a little awry. They were setting up a shot for something that was going to happen that afternoon or the following morning of the biggest scene in the movie, which was a big shootout inside of a church. And she was inside of the church asking Alec Baldwin to essentially frame out his gun for the shot. Now, the armorer at the time, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, was not allowed to be there because of COVID protocols. And this is a very important consideration. And there's also controversy over her having more than one job. She was also an assistant props person. But between her and the first assistant director and Alec Baldwin had the gun. Halyna Hutchins, who should not have been in the church, she should have actually been outside viewing the scene through something called Video Village. Video Village is like a monitoring station where they will remotely look at what's going on in the shot. Because the camera crew walked off due to safety concerns and other concerns, the Video Village operator was not there. That put her inside the building. So she was behind the camera. He points the gun at the camera. He claims he didn't pull the trigger, another controversy, but a bullet fired from that gun. It went through Helena Hutchins, killing her soon thereafter and into the director, Joel Sousa.
So I'll come to that, magic bullet in a minute, a bullet that came out of a gun that wasn't triggered and went into two people. But from the story that you've described so far, there would appear to be a bit of cheapskating and a bit of hysteria over COVID protocols, when the safety of someone, the life of someone, was cost by someone not being allowed to be there because of COVID. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Or was the production company trying to save dollars? Were they trying to maximize profits, squeeze costs? What lies behind?
All the above. That's why this is such a terrible disaster. This is an independent run and gun production, and I'm not trying to be pun, that's a terrible pun, but they're filming in New Mexico, extremely low budget. They only had a few $1 million. Alec Baldwin, keep in mind, is an A-list actor, and I think his salary for the movie was around $200,000. He could have easily asked for $2 million or more. So that gives you an idea of how low budget this really was. So were they trying to save money? Absolutely. The armorer that they had hired, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, had only done one previous movie. She kind of got hired because of nepotism. Her father is Thel Reed, who is a legendary armorer and gunfighter, gunslinger type. He would do tricks with guns that would blow your mind, on Ed Sullivan all the way through history. One of the top quick draw artists in the world. So his reputation helped her because she would kind of hang out with him when she was a kid on the sets, and he did teach her a lot. But they also wanted her to be a props assistant. There were only so many days in the budget for, quote, gun days, for armorer work. So they, threw on another job so she could get a little bit more money. That's even more of the controversy because I broke the email, or we did, where the line producer was complaining to Hannah Reed that she was spending too much time on guns and too little time on props. The ironies that come forth in this situation are countless.
Some of us are having difficulty, me included. In full disclosure, Alec Baldwin is a friend of mine. I'm struggling with the idea that an actor who's given a gun on a film set could conceivably know that there was a live bullet inside it. Whoever's fault that there was a live bullet inside it, it wasn't Alex, was it?
That's where we get into the weeds. You did ask the most important question of the entire affair that I think is being overlooked by the prosecution, or at least not advertised by the prosecution and the investigation. Where did the live ammo come from? If that was a dummy round, which it was supposed to be, nothing would matter. It would all be, okay, whatever, nothing, a click. If it was a blank, there would have been a bang. People might have been startled, but there would be no death here. There should have been no live ammunition on the set. So that is a giant question. We don't have answers for that. I can speculate on it, but I won't speculate completely because I don't like to get too far into pointing a finger without actual evidence. Things have gotten, really hedgy on this thing.
Well, yeah, they have. That's why we're talking about it. So what stage is this all at now? Who's been charged with what
That's where it gets confusing too. But right now, the people who were charged were Alec Baldwin, Dave Halls, and Hannah Gutierrez Reed. And that would be the lead, Alec Baldwin, who did have the gun, the first assistant director, who is considered the safety officer on this set, who handed it to Baldwin or didn't. We don't know for sure because Baldwin has contradicted himself on that. And Hannah Reed, the armorer. Those are the three charged. Now, Dave Halls copped a plea. So he is the only one who's actually been convicted. He pleaded out a sentence. He's not serving any time. I forget, he's being fined, and he has a record, and he's under supervision for X amount of time. I don't have that down. Alec Baldwin and Hannah were charged the same with negligent homicide and a enhancement charge because there was a weapon involved. Then things went crazy again. Alec Baldwin has an amazing legal team, very powerful, and they are not asleep. They're earning their money, and they essentially have shredded the case. There was initially a special prosecutor brought on who was also in the state legislature. She was brought on before she got voted into the state legislature. Alec Baldwin's team went after that fact and said, hey, you can't be a member of the legislature and acting on part of a DA. You're going into two parts of the government here. There's two branches. There's a problem. And they claimed it wasn't an issue, but she ultimately resigned. They also attacked the enhancement charges because it turns out the enhancement charges were written into law after the shooting even took place. So you can't charge somebody with a law that didn't exist when they did the crime. So that got thrown out. So then it's been taken down to only involuntary manslaughter, a negligence charge. But it went one step further, and Alec Baldwin's charges have been dismissed. Not with prejudice, though, so he is not out of the woods completely, but they have dismissed his charges on the theory that the gun had been modified before he even got it, which is incredibly troubling and confusing because the guns went to the FBI. And the FBI stated that they had not been modified, that they were in perfect working condition. And there's a chain of custody from the manufacturer to the set. So again, it's confusing. So right now, the charges are against Hannah Gutierrez Reed for the involuntary manslaughter. And they added another charge of trying to withhold or hide evidence, claiming that she was hiding drugs. And I believe by rumor, it's the white powder, the special white powder that you find in the White House.
Well, I was just about to say that, the kind of stuff that you find lying around in the Situation Room in the White House. What has this done for Alec Baldwin? Will he ever work again? How damaging has it all been for him?
He's been working this whole time. He filmed Rust. Rust has actually been filmed. It's in the can. I don't know if they're editing it or whatever, but all the filming took place in April. The charges against him being dismissed lined up the day before it filmed. So take it where you will. He's also in another movie coming up called Kent State. And judging from what I've seen in your past, that might be something you're interested in, the state of what happened in the United States and Ohio during Vietnam protests with the students that got shot down by the National Guard. He's in that movie coming up. He did, I think, 2 other movies while this has been going on. I mean, we're going on 2 years now. This is a long slog.
Well, I'm unfortunately old enough to have seen the Kent State massacre in real time. And there were plenty of intentional shooting of live bullets in that. Eric, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. It's your first time. I hope it isn't your last. It's been fascinating talking to you. Will Ukraine destroy Biden? Yes or no? On Telegram, 85% say yes. On Twitter, 80% say yes. On the YouTube community stream, 87% say yes. And on YouTube itself, 84% say yes. Well over 20,000 people have voted now. If you've got a point of view, get it recorded by voting on our poll in the next half hour or so. Let me take a quick break and then lots of calls to the end of the show. As the green smoke rose, their faces flashed out, pallid green, and faded again as it vanished. Then slowly the hissing passed into a humming, into a long, loud, droning noise. Suddenly, a humped shape rose out of the pit, and the ghost of a beam of light seemed to flicker out after it. Forthwith, flashes of actual flame, a bright glare leaping from one to another, sprang from the scattered group of men. It was as if some invisible jet impinged upon them and flashed into white flame. It was as if each man were suddenly and momentarily turned to fire. Now, my film Killing Kelly, about the strange death of Dr. David Kelly, is now on demand on my Patreon page. So my Patreon supporters are receiving that free. New Moats legend this evening, an indefatigable journalist and commentator, Ian Muir, whose work I very, very much admire, and a new Moats graduate, Joseph Ball. Thank you to both of you for your support. Quack Quacks says the problem is that the people voting in the US don't seem to see the actions of Biden and NATO as disgusting and bad. It's for many all good because they've been taught to think that and not to dare cross the line. And Paul McDonald says, if it's not Ukraine, it's definitely Hunter. As always, GG, great question. Great show. Thank you, Paul. Graham Briggs-White, a Moats legend, says, I also think Biden will spell the end for Ukraine. I hope Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping can keep up the level-headedness and diplomacy with these narcissistic sociopaths. And Andy says, a while ago you recommended Barbarossa by Alan Clark as a good book. I bought it, read it, took it to Africa. It's now thoroughly done, the rounds of family and friends. I'll be going back soon. Can you recommend another book or two? I'll have a think, Andy, but Barbarossa indeed is an epic piece of work. Lots of new callers this evening. We'll try to get to as many as possible. Cam35mm on YouTube says, no one hires a 23-year-old armourer. Nepotism at work in Hollywood. So the phone numbers, 08081 965522 if you're in Britain or Ireland, +1 844 944 3344 if you're in the US or Canada, and if you're in the rest of the world, 44203 966 2625. Peter is in Montreal, is a new caller, and especially welcome. Go ahead, Peter. What would you like to say?
Hello, Gigi. Peter from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. I love your show. Thank you very much. I want to talk about Kennedy Jr. I love what he says, and unfortunately, he doesn't say the same thing when it comes to Israel. And I heard you say that Israel is not the main or the most important point. I'm here to disagree with you because for 50 years, we have seen a war of attrition and impunity, and it has emboldened other countries. And soon we will have an Iron Dome over Manhattan and checkpoints for Harlem, an Iron Dome over London and checkpoints for Chelsea, an Iron Dome over Montréal, Centre-Ville, and checkpoints for Hochelaga, Maisonneuve, the Port-au-Prince. It is an important issue. I love Robert Kennedy. He gives me hope. And if you're wondering why a Québécois is worried about who's the next president, December 16th, Trump came in. January 17th, Québécois with a red hat walked into a mosque and killed 6 Muslims. So thank you for your show, and I wish you peace and happiness.
Thank you, Peter, and hats off to all my friends in Montreal. I have very fond memories of my time there. Of course, nobody needs to educate me on the importance of the Palestine-Israel question. Nobody has to tell me how much the Palestinian people have suffered or how big an historic injustice has been visited upon them. But I continue to insist that Israel-Palestine is not the number one issue in the world. The number one issue in the world is stopping World War III, a nuclear conflagration that will burn every land, including the Holy Land. So I have made the difficult decision, and it's more difficult for me than it is for most other people, to pray for the success of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in this election. Because notwithstanding my more than 50 years of work on the Palestine question, I cannot oppose Kennedy when he's right on every other subject, because he is wrong, grotesquely wrong, on the subject of Israel-Palestine. You'll have to forgive me for that. Annie writes to onair@moats.tv. Hello, George and team. I have my doubts that these corruption scandals will bring down Joe Biden because his corrupt party has total control of the Department of Justice and the FBI. And these entities are only interested in putting Trump behind bars, not Joe Biden. They are intent on protecting the crime family, the Biden crime family. That's from Annie. Well, of course that's true, Annie, but politics is a dynamic, kinetic business. And that which is true yesterday will not necessarily be true tomorrow, because people's opinions change when the facts change. And as each new fact has emerged in the corruption scandal of all time, no American president has ever been credibly accused of stealing tens of millions of dollars whilst being in the White House as the vice president of the country, and then taking the country into a catastrophic war against Russia to cover up the extent of his crimes and the crimes of his crime family in that country of Ukraine. Tony says Viktor Orban has launched a scathing attack on the US and insists China is the world's dominant power. He goes on to say that the UK and Italy will drop out of the world's top 10 economies and Germany will drop to 10th. I did see that and it sounded quite likely to me. Prince is in Texas on RFK. Go ahead, Prince.
Hey, George. Good evening. I'm in London. I first of all want to just thank you. I've been watching you since I was a kid, and you're a great man of integrity. I just want to say that. First things first on RFK. I am very hopeful, like the previous caller said, the Israel-Palestine question is not a strong suit and something which I take very personal. But still, on other issues, I think I can get behind him. But the problem is the media, of course, because no matter how good your policies are or whatever your intentions are, if you can get it to people, and I don't know if it's just here in the United States. I've seen, I think also in the UK, people are very gullible. Just look like the Russia coalition hoax, which till date is still, you still hear people talk about it in Congress. I was watching most of the hearings. You hear them just go through it. Oh, Russia intervened in the 2016 election. Even though all the tenets of that accusation have been proven false, it still stays as fact. And nobody fact checks it. And talk about fact check on the social media. If, let's say, JFK or the Twitter files or people like Matt Taibbi, if they make a grammatic error just as much as maybe failing to dot an I or a T, or to cause a T, it's called misinformation, and they'll kind of label them about that. But Joe Biden can take his bullet top it and stand there and say people did not get vaccinated, that the vaccines will stop the spread. Nothing will ever happen. Lie blatantly, disproven. Nothing will ever happen to them. Nobody puts a label on them. So these things heavily affect. My question is, how do we, because without the media actually exposing this, most of these things we're talking about is because I listen to people like you, I listen to other people. But not everybody listens to, the mainstream doesn't really listen to this. They listen to MSNBC or CNN, which are pretty much state media. So if information is being garnished
well,
the way
look,
it is right now,
Prince, let me give you some comfort. First of all, thank you for a wonderful call, and you summed up the situation very well. But if the media could dictate who the president was, then Donald Trump would never have been elected in 2016. All the media was against him. The newspapers, virtually all of the television stations, all of the radio stations, all of the disinformation department of state, the Obama White House, the Clinton White House, all of that deep state machinery was against Donald Trump. The FBI was against him. The CIA was against him. But he still won. Everybody is spewing hate on RFK, but he's still the most favorably regarded of all the candidates, including Trump, in the current political campaign season. So don't imagine that the so-called mainstream media can make the weather. Of course they can influence the weather. And I wish that they were even less important than they actually are. But they're not very important. You mentioned MSNBC. Do you know how many people watch MSNBC? If this was a normal business, it would be out of business long ago. Do you know how many people watch CNN? We are in danger of fixating too much on the liberal hegemony of media outlets with infinitesimally small viewerships. This show that you are watching has 10 times the viewership. 10 times the viewership of Rupert Murdoch's Talk TV with its budget of billions. So, let's not lose hope. Let's be our own media. You're right, not everybody watches me, watches those other people that you watch. Well, it's your job, and it's everybody else's job that's watching this and agrees with me this evening. It's your job to tell as many other people as you possibly can what we are all about, how to find us, encourage them, and check up afterwards whether they took your advice, and if they didn't, encourage them all over again. Have you any idea how we would multiply if everybody watching this did that? The best part of 2 million people will watch this program over the next 7 days. If those nearly 2 million spoke to one other person, we'd be 3 million if their advice was taken. And so on and exponentially on, it is possible to go. It's in our hands. Let's do it. I can't do much more than what I'm doing. I need you, the audience, to spread the word. Thanks, Prince. Great call. On YouTube, Udif asks, did Monty Python not write a song about Kissinger? I don't know, but I agree with Angelo. He's a blood-stained war criminal and mass murderer. But that's not how he's seen in China because, of course, him and Nixon opened up the United States to China, recognized that there was only one China, gave diplomatic recognition to China. And now they've had to send Henry Kissinger to ask if China might bail them out. Anthony is in Westgate-on-Sea on the movie Oppenheimer, which I haven't seen. Anthony, tell us what you thought about it.
Hi, yeah. It's an interesting movie. It's well worth watching. It's well acted. It's rather overly long, and it's very much about Oppenheimer. So there's lots of sort of focus on Oppenheimer's face and his dilemmas. And there's very little, I have to say, on the actual atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But I don't want to sort of spoil it for you, but I was just struck that, this nuclear holocaust is almost a sideshow to the internal conflicts of Oppenheimer and various people. And I found that, odd, let's say.
Very Hollywood, yeah.
Yeah, having said that, it's a thoughtful movie, but it's a lot about the internal workings. And, there is this tendency to just sort of other the very real victims of these appalling crimes. And I was just struck, actually.
Well, the whole genre of Vietnam movies did exactly the same thing, didn't it? The main thrust of these Vietnam War movies were that the Vietnamese had somehow forced the Americans to be so lethally beastly to them. And the angst of the war criminals that were murdering the children of South Vietnam was more important than the crime itself. Go ahead, Anthony.
But Liz Truss, would she press the nuclear button?
Yeah.
Hello? Sorry, Liz Truss was asked whether she pushed the nuclear button in a town hall. And the assumption of the question was you would do this to end the world, whatever. But how would you feel? That was the important question to ask her.
How would you feel about it? Yeah, exactly. But here's a point worth making. Today's nuclear weapons are 1,000 times more powerful than the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Think twice as powerful. Think 10 times as powerful. Think 100 times as powerful. Think 1,000 times more powerful. That is the explosive power of today's nuclear weapons. Russia has nearly 5,000 of them, and so does the United States. Other countries have smaller arsenals. The firepower exists to incinerate the entire world and every single person in it. It is therefore passing strange, Anthony, that only thee and me seem wildly anxious about it. Last word to you.
Sure. I think the question everyone needs to ask is, if you're against what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, how can you support nuclear deterrence, which relies on people being prepared to do something, as you're suggesting, 100 times worse? And yet every single UK Prime Minister and American President and candidate for presidency has to basically say they're prepared to do that in order to get in.
It's a crazy world, Anthony. Thanks for that great call. As you say, a thoughtful movie, a movie on which a lot of hopes are riding. I can't say I was in a hurry to see it before your call, and I'm probably less in a hurry now after what you've told us. 21,280 people have now voted in this poll, and overwhelmingly people believe that Ukraine will be the destruction of Biden. Polly Sporrin says if the US dollar crashes, it will affect all countries, as they also hold US treasuries. The entire West holds trillions in US dollar debts. They will also lose all their money. And Diogenes says Kissinger is the best the US has to offer in foreign policy. Such decadence cannot be described in words. Derek is in Glasgow and on the line. Let's hear from Derek. Go ahead, Derek.
How you doing, George?
All right, sir. What would you like to say?
The film Sounds of Freedom, John. It's getting no publicity, which has beaten Mission Impossible in the cinemas and beaten Indiana Jones. #1 in the American box office, and nobody's talking about it over here, or no showing it in cinemas anywhere over here in Glasgow. What's happening? The cover up, George?
Yeah. Well, we're trying to get somebody from the film on the show. It seems to be a very important film that highlights what is kind of obviously becoming a major issue in these decadent, depraved Western countries, including our own, including Scotland, by the way, as well as Britain as a whole. And in a way, there is a trend towards normalization, isn't there? I mean, what are these drag shows that small children are being brought to by idiot parents, being permitted by idiot local authorities and venue owners, and being completely unpoliced? What happened to the laws on indecent exposure? What happened to the laws on lewd and libidinous behavior? These laws, as far as I know, are still on the statute book, but nobody is applying them. So what happens is a child goes to one of these events, having been given school books and school lessons at a ridiculous appropriate age, then filled with all kinds of, let's be fair, highly controversial issues, like whether or not there are 2 genders or 96 genders, given material at school showing how anal sex works, how all kinds of sexual behavior actually works. Don't get me wrong, I'm the very last person in the world that could be described as a prude. I just want it kept away from the children. I'm quite happy for anybody to do anything they want to anybody with consent behind closed doors. With those who don't want to watch it or be influenced by it, not subjected to it, being, if you'll forgive the phrase, pushed down their throat. I don't want children, including my own children, to be prematurely exposed to sexual matters, heterosexual, bisexual, homosexual, multisexual, non-binary, or any of the rest of the acronym. I don't want it. And I was a victim as a child of paedophile abuse by a man in public office, by a man that ought to have had a responsibility commensurate with the trust that we had to put in him. So this is a subject of very great importance to me, both as a person who suffered it and as the father of children I'm determined should not suffer it. So thanks for the call about that movie. I promise you we're trying to get Mel Gibson himself on the show, and I'll keep you posted about it. Calls waiting include Simon, the legend in Florida, and Kenny, the legend in Acton. But here's an email from Ian Justin. Hi, George. Maybe it's my evil mind working overtime, But do you think Kissinger was trying to get China on their side to fight the Russians? Just saying, Ian, even Kissinger couldn't do that. Let me take a quick break and then it's your show right up to the close. Stay tuned.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now, David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down, the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. You're being thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news, and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, you know, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that at least.
You've got blood on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before it was published, but actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003 are finally brought to book.
It is a terrific film, a terrific cinema poster also. If you want to see it in full for free, go to my Patreon page, patreon.com/George Galloway. Join me. You'll be supporting my media work and you'll be able to watch that film in full. On the 1st of January 1989, Henry Kissinger was a song released by Monty Python. Our correspondent was right. I'd play it for you, but we'd get a copyright strike, and we can't have that. Not least because we've got a legend waiting on the line. It's Simon in Florida. Fire away, Simon.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. Well, as we've been experiencing, the world is simply changing at an absolutely frantic pace. And as one of your earlier callers mentioned, Viktor Orban, the current Prime Minister of Hungary, had been discussing changes regarding China. Most importantly, in his speech that he gave a few days ago in Romania, he said that we were on the verge of China becoming the premier power. And the danger was how America reacted to its change of circumstances, going from number one to number two. He actually said, never before has there been such a rapid and tectonic global shift in the balance of power as we are living in today. And he said further, China's completed 300 years of the Western Industrial Revolution and 30 years of the global information revolution in a few years. And obviously that's undoubtedly true. But whilst that has been commented on by Mr. Urban, an issue that had been little noticed took place in Ethiopia, as we kind of go around the world in my roundup for you here, where the Chinese defense advisor to the African Union at a celebration with many African dignitaries of the 96th birthday of the People's Liberation Army of China was at an event. And there was also the chief of staff of the African Standby Force, which is a kind of a new peacekeeping organization. That general, Mr. Xavier, absolutely sung the praises of the People's Republic of China and said how incredibly important they were to both peace and prosperity across the entire continent, and the importance of the forum with China on the African Union. I'm absolutely no doubt whatsoever that the US State Department will actually be spewing at the camaraderie that was displayed by those two senior figures at that event, that once more indicates the enormous influence of the expanding Chinese diplomacy. We saw the other side of that, the other end of the middle corridor, this week in Brussels, in the Russian mission to the European Union. Their charge d'affaires held a gathering that included all of the ambassadors from the 10 ASEAN nations. And in the press release, the two-page press release that was issued afterwards, he spelled out quite categorically, and for the first time in writing, not only the existence of the Greater Eurasian Partnership, but that also it was a security organization and a merger of nations and indeed a merger of blocs. So that once again proves the point that you and I have been discussing for several months again, that not only are these changes happening at an incredible pace, but indeed the entire plate, the tectonic nature, as Mr. Orban described, are indeed binding together, with China very much the dominant force, despite the fact that we have Macron, Blinken, and Secretary Austin all about to embark on their tour of the Pacific in order to oversee the largest military exercise of 30,000 troops from 13 nations blowing up some remote part of Australia in order to rattle their saber in the face of the Chinese government next week.
Meanwhile, the Russian and Chinese navies have just had a joint exercise, and even Victoria Nuland, who ate all the pies, turning up with all the donuts in the world, will not change the direction of these shifting tectonic plates. Thank you for another brilliant call, Simon in Florida. Frank Carlisle says RFK Jr. should be president, but somewhere along the line he'll come across massive obstacles in capital letters to stop him. And Pinko de Gallo says, I don't support RFK2, but I support the two-party system much less. On the line in England, in Buxton, is Leslie. Let's hear from Leslie. Go ahead.
Hello, George. It's from sunny Buxton here. Thanks for all the great work you're doing. What I'd like to say is that I know the BBC and the ITV has a biased news coverage, but they also have a biased drama and arts department. I've just recently written a play. It was awarded for Buxton Fringe called Striking Feet, about the longest strike by a group of women in British history. It's on YouTube at the moment, between 1980 and 1920, and it was packed out, and we turned people away. And people were saying to me, why isn't it on the telly? Why isn't it on BBC? Well, I told them it'll never get on BBC these days. In the old days, you got things like Days of Hope by Jim Allen, Ragged Trousered Philanthropists, Price of Coal. The BBC will not touch anything like it. It'll do identity politics, but their drama department will not touch anything that's pro-trade union or pro-socialist. And this is needed. People need to see these sort of things because it changes their opinions of things. And the BBC knows that. That's why it suppresses left-wing playwrights and artists at the moment. What's your views on that?
Well, if only you'd made these women strikers taking action not on wages and conditions for themselves and for their families and for their communities. If only you'd made it that they were protesting pronouns, that they were seeking to transgender themselves, to posit the demands of the LGBTQ plus agendas, you might well have got on the BBC. It's your own fault, you see. You insisted on accentuating the one thing that can unite everybody of every sexual orientation, of every ethnic background, of every color, of every religion. What's the one thing that could unite all those people. The economic demands that the women in your play were striving for. It's not an accident that we're living in a time where in Western countries, not in Eastern countries, but in Western countries, all you hear about, this din that never ends about abolishing women. People have periods, chest feeding, all these efforts that are being made to accentuate the importance of a tiny sliver of the population, 0.01% of the population, describe themselves as transsexual. Yet it is all that we hear about. Men putting on a bra and pants and becoming a female bodybuilder, even though their dick is clearly visible in their little posing pouch. I'm sorry if this is too strong meat. Men playing women's rugby, men in women's cycling, men in women's gymnastics and wrestling. What's that all about? Did the world go mad? Or did the powerful realize that actually, if you can get everybody squabbling and fighting about these ephemeral, tangential things, you'll keep them off the main square where they might be fighting for their wages, their conditions, their jobs, their rents, the state of the mortgage market, state of the economy. Wow, that would be too powerful for words. Michael Stevens says, I saw Killing Kelly in Liverpool, an excellent evening in the local Freemasons Hall also. Nice building. Forgive me, Father. Chuck is on the line from San Diego. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, good evening, George. I'd like to make two separate points on two issues you've touched on tonight. First, a few shows ago, I recommended a book called The Devil's Chessboard about the CIA and the Dulles brothers. To say that Henry Kissinger is the bastard offspring of these evil men and that we are living in the world that they created would be an understatement. The second point I'd like to make is I'm a SAG-AFTRA member. There are hundreds of thousands of SAG-AFTRA members all over the world, and they're not rich actors like Alec Baldwin. We are on strike now with the Writers Guild to maintain some semblance of an industry that represents the workers. The writers are on strike because AI is threatening their positions. The actors are on strike because AI and deep fake threaten to take our livelihoods away. Hollywood wants to use us once, take our image, and use it for any time they choose without compensation. The vast majority of the members of these unions and guilds are not rich. They are working people trying to make a living, and they are the reason these executives are making hundreds of millions of dollars annually in compensation, and it's simple greed. Thank you very much.
Greed? No, thank you for a brilliant call. I'm fully behind your struggle. I wish you every success with it. I've recently read the story of Trumbo, the screenwriter and great union activist who made tremendous sacrifices, including going to prison as a result of refusing to testify to the congressional committees set up under McCarthyism in the witch hunt. It's one of the best books I've ever seen. It was a very good film also. Trumbo, who had such important part to play in the development of such epic films as Spartacus itself. I have a great deal of fellow feeling towards you and your members. Chuck and I wish you every success in the fight that is underway. The poll is closed. 21,851 people voted. Pretty respectable for this time of year when audiences are down because of summer holidays and so on. And suffice to say that it was overwhelmingly the view of that section of our audience that Ukraine will destroy Joe Biden. Last call, I think, we'll have time for. It's a legend, though. Kenny in Acton. Go ahead, Ken.
Hello, George. Good evening to you.
Evening, sir.
Hi. I must say that was the most Scottish I've ever heard you sound about 5 minutes ago when you tried to say the word country, but for some unknown reason you decided to only pronounce half the word. That was rather amusing.
Okay, thanks, Kenny.
I'm guessing it wasn't intentional, but there you are. That was quite funny. I'm not working with Uber Eats anymore. I'm actually working as a forklift driver at an air cargo warehouse at Heathrow. Okay. And I'm doing 12-hour shifts, so only just been doing that over the last 6 weeks.
That's hard pounding.
I really enjoy it, though.
Pounding. Good luck with it.
I like the early starts and finishing early rather than having to work late at nights and at the weekends like I did with Uber Eats, So, yeah, I'd just like to sing a new song I've got stuck in my head.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah? Okay, here we go.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Go ahead. The great Phil Collins. I've been trying so long to let you know how I feel. And if I stumble, if I fall, just help me back so I can make you see. Please give me one more night. Give me one more night. One more night. 'Cause I can't wait forever. Give me just one more night. Give me just one more night. Give me just one more night. 'Cause I can't wait forever.
Unfortunately, I can't wait forever either, Kenny. It's always great to get a musical vignette from the forklift driver at Heathrow Airport and legend on the mother of all talk shows, Kenny in Acton. Morpheus X says Chinese are a respectful culture, not like the Anglo-Saxon fork-tongued politicians, prostitutes, and all the so-called think tank or experts. Well said. And Kieran Hall says, wouldn't it be nice if the UK had a government which represents our overall interests instead of the snakes in the city of London? Wouldn't it just? Well, that's the end of the show, unfortunately, but we've covered a fair amount of ground from the screenwriters and actors' struggle in Hollywood, the mishaps that can occur with tragic consequences in the making of movies. We had a review of Oppenheimer that was, well, not sizzling, if you'll forgive the pun. And we've talked about the epic trip, for that's what it is, of a 100-year-old man called Henry Kissinger to China for a reason that has not yet been told. I think Angelo Giuliano's thesis is as good a piece of speculation as any. The United States is in grave economic danger of default. Its debt has become astronomical, is exponentially multiplying, and cannot withstand the very significant moves away from dollarization that are underway in this tectonic shift that we've been talking about all night and many, many nights. It cannot survive the reduction in the percentage of people using the dollar as their reserve currency. It cannot survive the process of dumping of US Treasury bonds, which is heavily underway, not least in a controlled way so far by China itself. Wouldn't it be perhaps the greatest irony in all history if American capitalism and its United States of America, currently planning a military attack on China, was literally saved from economic collapse by the very China that they had been planning and had invested so much in attacking? If it turns out that that's what Kissinger was there for, well, I for one will be glad, because like Angelo, I want neither the economic collapse of the United States of America with all the mass poverty that would create there in the USA, but also cascading around the world. I don't want that, and I want World War III even less. As a matter of fact, as I get older and as I look at my young children playing as they were on the beach today, as Bob Dylan said, they ran to the water, their buckets to fill. As I saw them straggling back up the sand, I was filled with emotion, not just at my love for them and my gratitude to their mother, my wife, not just that, but the fear that what Oppenheimer developed and which others have now multiplied in lethality by thousands of times will bring about the end of this beautiful planet and all the beautiful people and things within it. I thought about it because there has never been a time in my long life of political struggle of more than half a century. I know I don't look it. There has never been a time when such an eventuality seemed more likely than it does as I address you in saying good night this very evening. God willing, and the apocalypse notwithstanding, I'll be back here on Wednesday at the slightly later time of 9 p.m. UK time. I appreciate you might be sitting out in the sun. I appreciate you might even be on holiday, but play catch up. At least watch the show or the clips from it on catch up. I hope so. In any case, I wish you a good night and thank you again for watching the Mother of All Talk Shows.